and welcome. This week, our topic is Westward Expansion. And honestly, hopefully you've been keeping track of the maps and things like that in your textbooks. The United States up until 1848 did not include the Southwest. It did not include California, Arizona, New Mexico, and even up until the 1830s, it did not include Texas. So that is more or less the point of this this PowerPoint in this lecture is how does the United States bring in that southwestern half, and how then does that affect things in the United States? In the United States, for a long time, there was this concept of manifest destiny. And manifest destiny was this idea that the United States should go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific, and that it should include, sort of the entire continent as it does today, from sea to shining sea, as they said. And the idea was that not only could the United States do that, the United States should do that. That it would be beneficial for everyone involved. For the Native Americans they would have civilization around them because people would be moving there. It would be good for the United States as a whole. And more importantly, it would be spreading democracy. That was sort of their point. It will be spreading democracy, spreading civilization, and bringing the goodness that we have as a country to the world. With that in mind, the watchword of the 1800s was move west. In the 1830s, occasionally that meant Texas. Before 1836, Texas was part of Mexico. It was the northernmost state in Mexico. And in the early 1830s, there had been a whole lot of Americans moving to Texas. Mexico had started a program where it made it extremely cheap and profitable for the American settlers to come to Mexico and live there. They wanted Americans to do that. They wanted to build up the population of Texas. There weren't a whole lot of native Mexican people that were living in Texas at the time. Well, it ended up backfiring pretty fantastically because the Americans and the Mexican people who were living in Texas felt very strongly by the 1836 that the government in Mexico City was not listening to them, that it didn't understand them, and that they were too far away from Mexico City to be governed by a government in Mexico City, and so they rebelled. And that's when you get the War for Texas independence. And long story short, Texas does gain its independence in 1836. They looked at simply becoming a part of the United States, but that did not happen right away. And so from 1836 to 1845, Texas was its own country. It was the Republic of Texas. Texas was finally brought into the United States in 1845. One of the reasons that Texas took so long to officially become a state was that there was a question of slavery, because those Americans that had moved to Texas had brought their slaves with them. And so the issue of bringing in another slave state was a huge deal, and they did not want that problem again. Think of the Compromise of 1820. Ironically, I guess, when the United States finally took in Texas as a state in 1845, this caused a problem with Mexico because there was a dispute over where the border between Texas and Mexico should be. Texas said that it should be the Rio Grande, which is what it is now, and Mexico said that the border should be much farther north than that. And the United States and Mexico ended up fighting a war, long story short, over that border in 1848. Now, it did not take long for that war to be finished, and it ended in 1848. And at the end of that war with Mexico, not only did the United States win, but as part of the peace treaty, the United States took, California, Arizona, New Mexico from Mexico and said it's now part of the United States. If you want, in the document packets, you can read President Polk's declaration of war against Mexico over the border issue. It is fascinating reading. Here's the thing. I like to consider the war with Mexico sort of the first step in the path towards the Civil War. Why? Because the United States annexes or brings in all of that land in the Southwest, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and suddenly the question becomes, is that land going to be slave or free? And if you go again back to the Missouri Compromise, a good chunk of it would have been slave because it was south of that 36-30 line. So it should have been slave states based on the Missouri Compromise. But by that time, by 1848, there was enough anti-slavery feeling in the United States, or at the very least in the northern part of the United States, that they were sort of able to successfully fight that. And that only brings up the issue of slavery. How do you keep a balance of free states and slave states? If you're not going to let the states in the Southwest be slave states, then the slave states are going to be outnumbered. It's going to be outnumbered quickly. What are the slave states going to be able to do? Will they be able to stand up for themselves in the Senate or in the House of Representatives? Will they have a fair say in what is happening? And the South felt very much that the answer was no. And so the war with Mexico and the peace treaty afterwards that brings in the Southwest really is the beginning of that major debate about slavery and slave states that leads to the Civil War. So you have to go back that far, which is why I like to talk about it. The last thing on the list of things to talk about when you talk about Western expansion is the gold rush in 1849. Keep in mind, the war ends in 1848. We get California in 1848. And by 1849, there is gold discovered in California. An unbelievable stroke of luck. And people flocked to California to find that gold. Can't say I necessarily blame them. It felt like, they were going to walk to a stream, dig up some dirt in the stream, and they were going to find gold nuggets, and they were going to be rich. That's why the football team from San Francisco is called the 49ers. It's after the people who came to California in 1849 because of the gold rush. So it's something to think about. The gold rush also means there are tons of people in California, which means California is ready to become a state, which means you have to worry about whether California is going to be a slave state or a free state, which again brings up that issue of slavery and continues to sort of pick at that scab or poke at that wound, if you will. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks.